The men who actually find gold carry cheap tools. Not always, but far more often than this hobby wants to admit. You've seen it happen at the claim. One guy shows up with a machine that cost more than 3 truck payments, swings it 8 hours in the sun, and at the tailgate that evening his vial has less in it than the fellow who spent $30 at a hardware store and never switched anything on. That's not luck, and it isn't a secret patch. One of those men was hunting gold and the other one was hunting a signal, and those are 2 different jobs that only look alike from the parking lot. So here's what I'm handing you. What the $30 tool actually is. Why the physics of a creek gives it an edge that no coil can buy at any price. Exactly where to put it and how deep to take it. And the single variable that decides whether you walk out with a gram or with wet boots and nothing. Stay with me to the end, because the last piece isn't a technique at all, and it has cost more men more good ground than any machine they ever bought. I want to know how many detectors you've owned by now. Let's get the mechanism straight first, because everything after this depends on it. Gold is heavy. Not heavy like a rock is heavy. Heavy like nothing else in that creek. It's roughly 19 times the weight of the same amount of water, and about 7 times what an average creek cobble weighs. When a creek is running normal summer flow, that gold isn't going anywhere. It sits. It only travels during high water when a spring flood picks up the whole stream bed and rolls it downstream in a slurry. And the second that water slows down, even for a few feet, the gold quits first. Before the sand quits. Before the gravel quits. It drops out and it goes hunting for the lowest, tightest, most protected place it can reach. That place is almost never the middle of a gravel bar. It's bedrock, and specifically the cracks in bedrock. A creek bottom with cracks running through it is a sluice box that God built and never has to clean out. Every one of those cracks is a riffle. The gold goes in and it doesn't come back out, because there's no flow down in there to lift it. It just packs in, year after year, flood after flood, and it waits. Now here's where the price tag lies to you. A detector is a wonderful machine, and I own one, but it finds pieces of gold that are big enough and shallow enough to talk back to a coil. Most American creek gold isn't that. It's flakes, it's grains, it's flour. A whole gram of it can be spread through a crack in pieces you'd need reading glasses to see, and every one of those pieces is worthless to a detector and worth real money to you. So the question stops being what can I detect and becomes what can I reach? That's the whole video, and it's why a piece of hardened steel that costs less than a tank of gas outproduces the machine on the right ground. The tool itself is a crevicing hook. You've probably walked past 100 of them. It's a length of hardened steel, 18 inches or so, about the length of your forearm from elbow to fingertip, with a bent hook on one end and a flattened chisel tip on the other. Some of them are welded up from rebar and rod. Some are old masonry chisels ground down. Mine is a bent piece of steel that a friend who runs a club a couple of states over made on his workbench and mailed to me in a length of PVC pipe, and it has moved more gold into my pan than anything else I own. Add a stiff paintbrush and a rubber bulb sucker, the kind that costs a few dollars, and you are into the whole outfit for about $30. Here's what most men believe about it, and they're not wrong, they're just stopping too early. The common reading is that a crevice tool is a cleanup tool. You dig your hole, you get down to bedrock, and then at the end you scratch out the cracks so you don't leave anything behind. Tidy work. An afterthought. And as far as that goes, it's true, and a man who does it that way will pick up a little more color than the man who doesn't. But it's backwards. Cleaning cracks isn't the last 5 minutes of your day. On the right stretch of creek, it's the entire day, and the digging is what gets skipped. Which brings me to the thing that fools men out there worse than pyrite ever has, and I'll be coming back to it twice more before we're done. Iron stain. You walk a creek, and you see a bedrock ledge running with orange and rust red, and everything you've ever read tells you iron and gold travel together. So you plant yourself on that ledge and you work it all day. Sometimes that stain is a real iron cap sitting over mineralized rock. Most of the time, it's rust from weathering, skin deep, with absolutely nothing behind it. The 5-second check costs you nothing. Snap a piece off with your hand and look at the fresh break. If the inside is plain gray country rock and the color is only on the outside like paint, it's weather. If the rust runs all the way through and the piece feels heavier in your palm than a rock that size has any business feeling, you have something worth a pan. Rub it with your thumb too. Surface rust smears orange onto your skin and comes away. The real thing is gritty and it stays put. I've watched men spend a whole Saturday on a stained ledge that was nothing but a rusty face, and I was one of them for a couple of seasons, so this is not me looking down from anywhere. Now, the mechanism underneath all of this is what changes what you're looking at. Not every crack holds. This is the part that separates a man who finds gold in crevices from a man who scrapes 100 of them and pans dirt. A creek in flood is moving in one direction with enormous force. A crack that runs across that direction, roughly at right angles to the current, has its opening facing upstream into the moving material. Gold drops in and the water skims over the top. That crack is a riffle and it fills. A crack that runs the same direction as the flow, parallel with the current, has water running down the length of it during every flood, and that water scours it out. Same rock, same creek, same day, and one of them pays and one of them is empty. Nobody tells beginners this. I went years without knowing it. Width matters just as much. A crack wider than about 2 inches, wide enough to get 3 fingers into, usually behaves like a little pothole and fills with rounded gravel, and it can still hold gold, but it's had a lot of chances to flush. The ones I want are 1/2 inch to 1 inch, about the width of your little finger, packed so tight with gray-brown clay and grit that you have to work to open them. That packing is the point. Once material sets up hard in a crack, the next flood runs over the top of it and never disturbs it, and everything underneath is sealed in. That's why crevice gold is often coarser and rougher than what you pan off a bar. It hasn't moved in a very long time. There's one more piece, and it's the one that gets ignored. False bedrock. That's a layer of hard-packed clay or cemented gravel sitting above the real bedrock, and to your shovel it feels exactly like you've hit bottom. Gold stacks on top of it just like it does on true bedrock, so you'll get color, you'll feel good, and you'll go home. Meanwhile, the real bedrock and the real pay is another foot or 2 down. Test it. Drive the chisel end of your hook straight down and lean on it. Bedrock stops steel cold and rings. Clay takes it. The old survey bulletins from the 20s and 30s are full of dry sentences about placer gold, concentrating on and immediately below bedrock, and about hard pan layers holding false concentrations above it, and men have been reading past that paragraph for 100 years. Quick pause here. Everything I just walked you through and dozens more tricks like it is inside the Gold Prospector's Bible, 2026 edition, 50 field-tested tricks to stop getting skunked. Right now it comes with the 30-day skunk-proof roadmap, completely free. A step-by-step 4-week plan to pick your ground, test smarter, and find your first real color. Link in the description. QR code on screen. This is the season you stop guessing where the gold is. Now the variable that decides all of it, and this is the part worth rewatching. It isn't the tool. It isn't even the crack. It's the last 1/4 inch, and where on the creek you're standing when you go after it. Start with the last 1/4 inch, because this is my own money lost, and I'd rather it be yours saved. For 2 full seasons, I cleaned crevices the way you'd clean a rain gutter. Hook down in, drag the packed material out, brush it into the pan, move to the next one. I was getting color. I was pleased with myself. Then the old-timer who taught me to read a bank watched me do it for about 90 seconds and asked me why I was throwing back the part with the gold in it. In a packed crevice, the material sorts itself. Loose gravel on top, then grit, then a layer of stiff gray clay, and then a thin skin of the finest, blackest, heaviest sand, welded to the rock at the very bottom. That skin is where the gold lives. In my experience, it's easily 3/4 of everything a crack will give you. I had been pulling out the first 8 inches, roughly the depth of a coffee can, and leaving the pay glued to the stone. 2 seasons. I know the exact stretch of creek it happened on, and it still bothers me. So the sequence goes like this. Open the crack all the way to its bottom with the chisel end, and keep going until the steel is grinding on solid rock and nothing else comes loose. Then take the brush and scrub the bare rock inside the crack like you're cleaning grout, hard, both walls. Then the bulb sucker, squeezed empty first, tip right down against the stone. Every crack gets worked 3 separate ways before you move. If you're doing it right, one good crack is 15 to 20 minutes, not 2. And if you're working wet, suck the water and slurry out rather than pouring water down the crack, because water pouring in lifts fine gold right back out over the lip. Where you stand is the other half. Earlier I mentioned a crack I found on a foothills creek that gave up more gold in one afternoon than I got out of 2 summers with a machine, and I said I'd come back to how I found it. Here it is. I stopped working the water. It was August. The flow was down to a trickle, and I walked the exposed bedrock on the inside of a long, slow bend, 4 feet above the summer water line, about chest height on a man standing in the channel. That shelf is underwater and roaring every spring, and bone dry every August. Gold gets driven into it at flood stage, and then nothing touches it for 10 months. The crack was 11 inches deep, it ran square across the old flow, and it was packed so hard I opened it with a chisel and a rock. Look at the first fast water below a bend. Look about 20 feet upstream of any big anchored boulder, roughly a pickup and a half in length, and look at any bedrock shelf standing above the current water line that shows scour marks. Those 3 places, in that order. Look, I'll be straight with you. The 50 field-tested tricks in the Gold Prospector's Bible run across 5 chapters, and it comes with the printable 10-minute streamside checklist, plus the 30-day roadmap that's still free with the bundle right now. I don't know how long that gift stays in there. If you've been watching these videos thinking this could finally be your season, that's the move to make. Link in the description below, QR code on screen. Make this the year you find your first real color. Something I owe you before we go on, because I don't like pretending to know more than I do. I have never worked out why the richest crevices I've hit sit just downstream of a smooth, slick, crackless patch of bedrock. It happens too often to be nothing. My guess is the slick rock speeds the water up and the first crack past it is where the pressure drops, but that's a guess, and I won't dress it up as fact. What I know is what came up in the pan, notebook entry after notebook entry, on 4 different creeks in 2 states. When I see 15 feet of polished bedrock with no cracks in it, I now walk to the downstream edge and start there. Here's a man who could have used a better eye. 1886, a place called Langlagte in South Africa. George Harrison, an itinerant miner, finds gold in a gray outcrop full of rounded pebbles that looks for all the world like hardened gravel. Not a quartz vein, not a shining ledge. Cemented pebbles, the kind of rock you'd step on without a thought. He registers his claim, and the story that's come down is that he sold it for about 10 pounds and walked off looking for something better. That outcrop was the edge of the Witwatersrand Rand, which has since produced somewhere near a third of all the gold ever mined on this planet. He wasn't lazy, and he wasn't stupid. He simply couldn't read what he was holding, so the value of it was invisible. And invisible is the same as absent when you're the one standing there deciding whether to stay or move on. That's the whole business. Not access. Not equipment. Reading. Which brings us to the last piece. And it isn't about crevices at all. A tool doesn't just do work for you. It decides where you're willing to stand. That's the part nobody says out loud, and it's why the brands never will. Give a man a $5,000 detector, and he will, without ever choosing to, start spending his time on ground the detector enjoys. Open bars he can swing across, low mineral dirt that doesn't make the machine scream, shallow, tidy, walkable ground, and he'll avoid the tight bedrock chutes, the brush-choked inside bends, the cracked shelves under the willows, because you can't swing a coil in there and the machine sulks. The machine quietly edits his creek down to the parts it likes, and the parts it likes are the parts everybody else has already worked. That's the ground loss I promised you at the start, and it's bigger than any purchase price. The crevice tool does the opposite. It costs nothing, so you'll risk it. It's small, so it goes where you go. and it points you at the exact ground the machine steered you away from, which is also the ground the last 100 years of prospectors mostly stepped over. So the widening is this. From now on, stop reading a creek as places and start reading it as traps. Ask one question at every stop, which is, where did the water slow down and what caught what dropped? A crack across the flow is a trap. The upstream face of a bedrock ridge is a trap. A root wad wedged into a chute is a trap. Even a lip of hardpan 2 inches high is a trap. Once your eye does that automatically, you can walk a creek you've never seen and know inside 10 minutes whether it's worth your Saturday, with no batteries involved. And the last iron stain reminder, because it'll test you on this new creek. When you find a rust-red shelf full of beautiful tight cracks, do the break and thumb check before you commit 2 hours. If it wipes orange and the inside is gray, the stain means nothing about the gold, and you judge that shelf purely on how the cracks are running and how hard they're packed. I've had my best crevice days on plain gray rock that looked like a sidewalk. Now the honest part about when none of this works. In spring runoff, forget it. If the bedrock you want is under moving water, you can't see the cracks, you can't clean them, and anything you loosen washes away downstream from you. High water is for scouting the high shelves you'll come back to in August, and for taking notes. It also fails where the bedrock is buried deep. Plenty of creeks have 8 or 10 feet of gravel over the bottom, and no crevicing tool on earth reaches that. And it fails in soft, rotten, decomposed rock that crumbles instead of cracking. Because a crack that reshapes itself every flood never gets the chance to hold anything. When I run into those, I go back to the bank and work the old high benches with a pan and a classifier instead, and I keep the hook in the truck. If you've ever cleaned a crevice and stopped short of the bottom, I want to hear it. So here's where you are now compared to 20-odd minutes ago. You can look at a bedrock ledge and tell which cracks are traps and which ones are flushed, just from how they run against the old current. You can tell false bedrock from the real thing with one hard push on a chisel. You know that the last quarter inch, the black skin welded to the stone, is the part that actually pays, and that most men leave it behind. You know how to call a rusty ledge honest or a liar in 5 seconds with nothing but your hands. And you know that a machine is not neutral, that it picks your ground for you if you let it. Not finding gold was never about deserving it more or wanting it more. You were sent to look at the wrong things, same as I was. If you want more of this kind of reading, stick around, because the next time you walk a riverbank, I'd rather you weren't the person who stepped over a season's worth of gold and kept going. Next time out, I want to get into bench deposits, the old high gravels sitting 15 and 20 feet above the water that most men never even glance at, and why the creek you're standing in is not the creek that put the gold there. Take the $30 hook, find the crack that runs across the flow, clean it all the way to the stone. Good luck out there, gold hunter.